Joon-seo had not slept in his own bedroom in 11 months. He had not planned to notice his secretary the way he noticed her on a Thursday evening in November, when the rain over downtown Los Angeles came down hard enough to shut down 2 freeway on-ramps and strand half the building's staff in the lobby. That night broke something open. Weeks later, Seo filed for divorce, not from jealousy, but from 14 years of the same careful distance he'd been living in. Her father, Joon-seo, arrived within days to remind Joon-seo what the marriage secured: 3 shipping lanes. Joon-seo refused to use it as leverage, and Simone drew her own boundary. Nothing between them until the divorce was final. Seo took the news with more grace than expected. The lanes stayed unresolved. And 2 people kept waiting for permission neither had actually asked anyone for. Welcome back. If this is your first time here, parts 1 through 3 are everything you need. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss what comes next. Now let's get into part 3. The renegotiation of the shipping lanes stalled twice in the 3rd month, both times over language Tae-sik's lawyers insisted on, and Joon-seo's team refused to accept without modification. The specific grinding pace of 2 men who had each spent 4 decades learning that patience was itself a form of leverage. Joon-seo did not mind the pace. What he minded was the phone call he received on a Tuesday from a business editor at a regional trade publication, requesting comment on reports of personal complications surrounding the Han-yoon divorce, phrased with the specific, careful vagueness reporters used when they had a story they weren't yet certain they could print. He declined comment and called his head of communications within the hour. "Someone's talking," Priya said, after 2 days of quiet inquiry. "Not from inside your office. My best guess is someone adjacent to the Yoon household. A source close enough to know about the divorce filing, but not close enough to have the actual details right. The current version floating around says you left your wife for your secretary. That's not accurate, but it's the version that sells. Find out who," Joon-seo said. "I have a guess," Priya said. Tae-sik's been making calls to 2 competing shipping concerns this month, testing interest in the lanes independent of any settlement with you. A story that makes you look like the reason the marriage failed gives him leverage in exactly the conversations he's already having. It paints you as the party who broke faith first. Joon-seo sat with that for a long moment, understanding the specific shape of what his father-in-law was building. Not evidence, precisely, but atmosphere, the kind of reputational pressure that could move a negotiation without ever requiring a single admissible fact. "He's using a rumor as a term sheet," Joon-seo said. "That's exactly what he's doing," Priya said. "And it's working, unless you get ahead of it." Joon-seo spent the rest of that afternoon reviewing every document his legal team had produced on the lanes, looking for the specific leverage point that would let him neutralize the rumor without dignifying it with a direct denial that would only draw more attention to a story that had no real substance behind it in the first place. He had learned, across 11 years of running an empire built on discipline rather than instinct, that the worst response to manufactured pressure was often the most obvious one: a public statement, a swift retaliation, anything that confirmed the story mattered enough to fight about. "We don't deny it directly," he told Priya, once he'd worked through the calculation. "We correct the specific factual error, the timeline. The divorce filing predates any public visibility Simone's had in my professional life by months. That's documentable, dry, and boring enough that it kills the story's momentum without turning it into a bigger conversation than it already is." "That's the right instinct," Priya said. "But it won't stop Tae-sik from using the atmosphere the rumors already created, even after the correction runs. He doesn't need the story to be true. He just needs you distracted enough and cautious enough that you soften your position at the table." "Then I won't soften it," Joon-seo said. "I'll do exactly the opposite. I'll finish this negotiation faster, not slower, so there's less time for him to keep manufacturing pressure out of thin air." He thought, briefly, of Simone, of what this particular kind of pressure would cost her specifically. A woman with no lawyers, no communications team, no 4 decades of practice absorbing reputational attacks as simply the cost of doing business. He had built himself a fortress against exactly this kind of exposure his entire adult life. She had never needed one, because she had never before been visible enough to require it. That, he understood, was about to change, and there was very little he could do to protect her from the part of it that had already happened. He had built an empire on the discipline of controlling every variable he could reach. This was the first time in years he'd encountered one he genuinely couldn't control on her behalf, no matter how much of his own leverage he was willing to spend trying. Simone learned about the story from her mother, which was its own particular kind of unwelcome. Corinne Hale calling from Baldwin Hills, with the specific careful worry of a parent who'd read something online she didn't fully understand and needed her daughter to explain it before her father saw it too. "Some websites saying you broke up a marriage," Corinne said, without preamble. "Your father's not seen it yet. I need you to tell me the truth before he does, because he'll want to drive downtown and say something to somebody, and at 66, his knees can't take a fight he thinks he's got to have." "Mama, it's not true. Nothing's happened between us. I made sure of that myself, months ago, on purpose." Simone kept her voice level, though her hands, gripping the phone, were not entirely steady. "His marriage was over long before I ever mattered to it. I'm not going to let a rumor rewrite that just because it's a more interesting story than the truth." "I believe you," Corinne said. "I raised you. I know the difference between my daughter being careless and my daughter being careful, and you've never once in your life been the first kind. I just need you ready for what it costs, baby, being the woman people decide to blame regardless of what actually happened." Simone thought of her grandmother's photograph on her desk. The specific conviction that dignity wasn't something other people granted, it was something you decided to carry regardless of what anyone else withheld. "I'm ready," she said, with more certainty than she entirely felt. She went into the office the next morning anyway, because retreating from a rumor felt, to her, like confirming it, and found Ye-jin waiting in the lobby with 2 coffees and an expression that suggested she'd already read everything there was to read. "I saw it," Ye-jin said, handing her a cup. "I want you to know I don't believe a word of it, and neither does anyone who's actually met you. But I also know what it feels like to have your name attached to a story you didn't write, and I wanted you to have someone in this building this morning who isn't just your boss." "Thank you," Simone said, and meant it more than the 2 words could easily carry. "He's furious, by the way," Ye-jin added, not performatively, genuinely. "I haven't seen him like this in years." "He shouldn't be furious on my behalf," Simone said. "It's my name attached to it. I can handle what people say about me." "That's exactly why he's furious," Ye-jin said. "Because you shouldn't have to handle it at all. You didn't do anything except stay behind in a storm to help people who weren't your responsibility and be good at your job for 2 years afterward. If the price of that is strangers deciding you're some kind of homewrecker, then something's wrong with the story, not with you." She studied Simone for a moment, something softening in her expression. "For what it's worth, I think my mother would have liked you. She had a very specific radar for people who did the right thing without needing an audience for it. I think you'd have passed her test in about 4 minutes. Your brothers told me a little about her," Simone said. "The bedtime stories. The fox who kept finding her way home." "He told you that?" Ye-jin looked briefly surprised. Then something warmer replaced it. "He doesn't tell people that. I don't think he's told anyone that in years." "He didn't tell me directly," Simone said. "It came up once, when he was explaining why he understood what it meant to sit with someone through something frightening. I don't think he realized how much he was actually telling me." Ye-jin was quiet for a moment, turning her coffee cup slowly in her hands. "Good," she said finally. "That means he trusts you with the parts of himself he usually keeps locked away from everyone, including me, most days. Don't let one rumor convince you that trust was a mistake." "I don't intend to," Simone said, and the particular steadiness in her voice told Ye-jin, more clearly than any direct promise could have, exactly how little ground she intended to give up. Not to a rumor, not to a stranger's opinion, and not to a father-in-law who had never once bothered to learn her name before deciding what to do with it. A rumor just landed on the one thing they've spent months protecting. Like and subscribe to help us grow if you're already bracing for how far this goes. Comment if you think Tae-sik planned this on purpose. We're just getting into it. Joon-seo requested a meeting with Tae-sik directly, foregoing lawyers on both sides, a departure from months of carefully mediated exchanges that told Tae-sik, before a single word was spoken, exactly how seriously his son-in-law intended to take this conversation. "A story is circulating," Joon-seo said, once the office door closed. "It names my secretary. It implies I ended my marriage for her, which is false, and which you know is false, because you've read the same filings I have. I want to know if it originated with you." "You're accusing me of leaking my own daughter's business to a trade paper," Tae-sik said, unmoved. "That's a serious accusation to make without evidence." "I'm not accusing you of leaking it directly," Joon-seo said. "I'm telling you that whoever did, it serves exactly one purpose: pressuring me into a settlement that favors your shipping interests by making the alternative look like public scandal. That's a negotiating tactic, Mr. Yoon, and I'd have more respect for it if you simply admitted to using one instead of letting me discover it secondhand from a business editor." Tae-sik was quiet for a long moment, something shifting behind his composed expression. Not quite an admission, but not quite a denial either. "I made calls," he said finally, "to 2 shipping concerns, testing the lane's value independent of you. I did not authorize anyone to speak to a reporter, but I won't pretend I'm sorry a story exists that reminds you what you stand to lose if these negotiations collapse. There's a woman whose reputation is being used as collateral in a business dispute she has nothing to do with," Joon-seo said. "That's not a negotiating tactic I'm willing to let stand, regardless of what it costs the lanes." Sakura, who had been listening from the doorway longer than either man realized, stepped into the room before her father could answer. "Enough," she said, and something in her voice carried a weight neither man had heard from her in 14 years of careful management. "Father, if you leaked this, or let it leak, or simply failed to stop it once you learned of it, you did it to me as much as to him. I am the one whose marriage is being turned into gossip. I would like to know, honestly, whether you did this for the lanes or because some part of you still can't accept that I chose to end something you arranged." Tae-sik's jaw tightened. "Everything I have done," he said, "I have done to protect this family's position." "Then protect it honestly," Sarah said. "Or don't claim its protection at all." Tae-sik looked between the two of them for a long moment, something in his composed expression finally cracking under a weight he hadn't anticipated carrying into this room. "You think I don't know what this looks like," he said. Quieter now, the negotiator's edge briefly absent from his voice. "A father using his own daughter's marriage as a bargaining chip, even after it's ended. I built this shipping concern from nothing, the same as Han Sang-chul did, in a country that gave neither of us anything we didn't take for ourselves twice over. Everything I have, I built by refusing to leave value on the table when I could extract it. I don't know how to negotiate any other way, even when the thing being negotiated is my own child's happiness." "Then learn," Sarah said. "Because I am not going to spend the rest of my life being a term in someone else's contract, father. Not yours, not anyone's. I let that happen for 14 years because it was easier than fighting you, and I am done being easy about it." Joon-seo watched the exchange without interrupting, understanding that whatever was happening between father and daughter mattered more, in this moment, than anything he could add to it. He had spent considerable time, across the divorce proceedings, recalculating his own resentment toward Sang-hoon into something closer to complicated grief, the specific grief of loving a man who had never once asked what his son actually wanted. Watching Sarah finally say the version of that sentence to her own father, he recognized the shape of it immediately. "I'll withdraw the calls to the other concerns," Tae-sik said finally, the words arriving with visible difficulty. "I'll instruct my lawyers to finalize the lanes on the terms already discussed. I won't pretend this is an apology, because I don't know how to make one that would mean anything, but I'll stop making this harder than it needs to be." "That's more than I expected," Joon-seo said, genuinely. "I'll take it, and I mean that." Sarah didn't say anything further, but the look she gave her father, steady, unflinching, the specific expression of a woman who had finally stopped waiting for permission she'd spent 14 years assuming she needed, told both men in the room that something between them had shifted permanently, whatever came next. The retraction, when it finally came, arrived quietly, A brief correction buried on the same trade publication's website, walking back the personal complications framing after Priya's team supplied documentation showing the divorce filing predated any relationship beyond employer and employee. It would not undo every conversation Simone had already had with concerned family members, or the specific weight of knowing strangers had spent a week deciding what kind of woman she was, based on nothing at all. But it was something, and Joon-seo made certain, personally, that it ran before the week ended. Tae-sik did not apologize directly. What he did, 3 days after Seller confronted him in front of both of them, was send a revised term sheet, the shipping lanes renegotiated on terms considerably closer to what Joon-seo's team had originally proposed months earlier, without any further reference to the marriage as leverage. "That's not an apology," Joon-seo said, reviewing it with Priya. "But it's the closest thing to one his particular vocabulary allows for." Simone read the retraction 3 times before she believed it had actually run, sitting at her desk in the quiet after the rest of the floor had gone home, the specific low hum of relief settling in slowly rather than arriving all at once. She had spent a week absorbing the particular exhaustion of being discussed by strangers who had never met her, deciding what kind of woman she was based on a story that had never been true, and the retraction did not erase that week so much as finally give it somewhere to end. Joon-seo found her there an hour later. The office emptied out around them the way it had the night of the storm. "You didn't have to run it personally," she said, when he sat down across from her. "You could have let Priya's team handle it and stayed out of the specifics." "I wanted my name on the correction," he said, "not hers. If people are going to associate your name with mine over something false, I want them to see, just as clearly, that I was the one who fixed it. I don't want you carrying the weight of a lie I could have corrected faster if I hadn't been so careful about not overreacting." "You weren't wrong to be careful," Simone said. "Overreacting would have made the story bigger. I know that. I've watched you make smarter decisions under pressure than most people manage on a calm day." She looked at him for a long moment. "I just didn't expect it to cost this much. Waiting. I thought I understood what I was signing up for when I proposed it. I don't think I actually did, not fully, until this week." "Do you regret proposing it?" he asked, and there was something careful in the question, like he genuinely didn't know which answer he was braced for. "No," Simone said, without hesitation. "I regret that it cost what it cost this week. Those are different things. I'd still choose the waiting, even knowing what this particular week would ask of me. I just wanted you to know it wasn't free. Nothing about this has been free, for either of us." "I know," Joon-seo said. "I don't think either of us thought it would be." They sat together for a while after that, not saying much, the specific, comfortable silence of 2 people who had learned, across months of careful distance, that not every moment required conversation to mean something. Sarah came to see him separately, the same week, finding him on the balcony where he'd once told Simone he intended to keep waiting however long it took. "I meant what I said to my father," she told him. "I'm sorry it took a scandal for me to say it properly. I think, if I'm honest, I've spent my whole life letting him decide which battles were worth fighting, and this was the first time I decided one for myself." "Thank you," Joon-seo said, "for that, and for defending Simone. You didn't have to." "I know what it's like to be defined by a story someone else decided to tell about you," Segra said. "I wasn't going to let that happen to her while I still had breath to stop it. Whatever else is true about the last 14 years, I don't think either of us ever wanted to be the kind of people who let that happen to someone else." The final settlement session took place 2 weeks later, in a conference room considerably calmer than any of the previous ones had been. Lawyers on both sides, the lanes finally resolved on their own merits, and at the center of the table, a single remaining document neither party had signed yet. "This is it," Segra's attorney said, sliding the final decree across the table. "Both sides have agreed to every term. This finalizes the divorce, pending signature." Joon-seo picked up the pen. Across the table, Segra did the same. 14 years, she said, quietly, almost to herself, not quite to him. "I hope whatever comes next is chosen instead of inherited. For both of us." "I hope so too," Joon-seo said honestly, and signed his name beneath hers. 14 years of a marriage neither of them chose, just ended with 2 signatures in a quiet conference room. Like and subscribe to help us grow if you've been waiting for this moment as long as they have. The waiting isn't over yet, though. Stay close. Joon-seo found Simone on the office balcony that evening, the specific quiet of a floor emptied out for the night, settling around them, the way it had the night of the storm that started all of this. "It's finalized," he said, without preamble. "Signed 2 hours ago. There's nothing left waiting on paper." Simone turned from the railing, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything. The city spread out below them, in its ordinary, indifferent enormity, considerably calmer than the storm that had first cracked things open 11 months and 3 weeks ago. "How does it feel?" she asked finally, genuinely curious. "Lighter than I expected," he said. "And strange. 14 years of my life just ended with 2 signatures and a handshake, and I keep waiting for it to feel larger than that, and it doesn't. It just feels like the beginning of something I've been putting off examining too closely." "That's usually how the important things end," Simone said, quietly. "Not the way anyone writes about them afterward." He crossed the balcony to stand beside her, close enough now that the careful distance they'd both maintained for months felt, for the first time, like something they were choosing to close, rather than something either of them was still obligated to keep. "I made you a promise months ago," he said, "that whatever this became, it would start clean. No unfinished ground underneath it." "I remember," Simone said. "There's no unfinished ground left," he said. "I signed the last of it 2 hours ago." Simone studied him with the same direct attention she'd given him since the night of the storm, the quality his sister had named before either of them let themselves see it clearly. "I've been waiting 11 months to hear you say that," she said. "I didn't think it would feel this much like relief, saying it back to you." "Then say it," he said. "We're not waiting anymore," Simone said, and something in her voice, steady, unhurried, the same plain certainty she brought to everything that actually mattered, told him this was not a small thing for her to say, even now, even with every reason clear. "Whatever this becomes next, it starts tonight, on our own terms, chosen instead of inherited." Neither of them moved to close the last distance between them right away. They simply stood there, on a balcony 30 stories above a city that had watched this build for 11 months, without either of them naming it, letting the moment be exactly as unhurried as everything else they'd built. "I keep thinking about that first night," Joon-seo said. "The storm. I watched you manage a room full of stranded people without once making it about yourself, and I understood, standing in that doorway, that I was watching something I'd been missing my entire adult life, without ever once knowing I was missing it. I remember exactly what you said to me that night," Simone said. "You told me I should go home. I told you I knew you didn't have anywhere you actually wanted to go home to." "You were right," he said. "I've thought about that sentence more times than I've admitted to you. It was the first time in 14 years someone said the true thing out loud instead of managing around it. I only said it because I'd been managing around plenty of true things myself, for a long time before that storm," Simone said. "My grandmother used to tell me the loneliest unhappiness is the kind you've gotten so used to hiding, you forget other people might want to help carry it. I think I recognized that in you, before I understood why it mattered so much to me personally." "However long it takes," Joon-seo said, echoing the words that had carried them through the waiting. "I'd wait through all of it again, if it meant landing here." "You won't have to," Simone said. "That part's finally over." Yoon-tae-sik sat alone in his office, overlooking the port 2 nights after the signing, reviewing the final settlement terms with the specific dissatisfaction of a man who had lost more ground in a negotiation than he was accustomed to losing. He had spent 4 decades believing that patience and leverage were the only 2 currencies that mattered in business, and he had just watched both fail him against a son-in-law, considerably younger than him, who had simply refused to negotiate on anything but honest terms. It was not a lesson he intended to learn twice. It was, however, a lesson he was still deciding how to apply. His assistant knocked once, entering with a folder he hadn't requested. "A shipping concern out of Long Beach reached out," she said. "Independent operator, no ties to the Han family. They've expressed interest in an alliance, given the changes to your position this quarter. Tai-sik set down the settlement papers, something calculating settling behind his composed expression. The specific recalibration of a man who had lost one alliance and was already searching for the next one to replace it. Set the meeting, he said. If the Han family no longer requires my daughter to secure their lanes, perhaps it's time I found out what my position is actually worth without them. His assistant paused at the door. Should I inform Sarah? No, Tai-sik said, already reaching for his phone. Some things a father decides for himself. The divorce is final, the waiting is over, but her father just made a call that has nothing to do with either of them, and everything to do with what comes next. Comment if you think this is really finished, or if Tai-sik's about to start a war nobody saw coming. Part 4 is coming.